What just happened in Spain should matter to every current and former Jehovah's Witness, especially if you've ever been told that your experience doesn't count, that you're just bitter, or that speaking out makes you an enemy of God. Because a court in Madrid has now ruled that former Jehovah's Witnesses can publicly describe the organization as a destructive sect or a destructive cult when that language is tied to real testimony and public debate. And that is huge, not because a court suddenly proved everything critics have said, but because it recognized something the organization has spent decades trying to suppress. People have a right to tell the truth about their lived experience. And for anyone who has left this religion, you already know why this matters. Jehovah's Witnesses have always been obsessed with reputation management. Image is everything. Appear faithful, appear loving, appear clean, appear peaceful. But behind that image, many of us live through fear, isolation, pressure, shunning, guilt, and emotional manipulation. So when a court says former members can speak openly about that, it is more than legal language. It is public recognition that the pain was real. Let's break it down. The case began because Jehovah's Witnesses filed a lawsuit for protection of honor against the Spanish Association of Victims of Jehovah's Witnesses. So in plain English, the organization did not want former members using damaging language about them in public. But the court sided with the right to free expression, saying these kinds of descriptions can be protected when they are based on testimony and contribute to a broader public discussion. A media outlet reported the matter as follows. A Madrid court has ruled that Jehovah's Witnesses may be described as a destructive sect in a dispute that pits freedom of expression against reputational rights. The decision, published on Tuesday, April the 21st, 2026, has reignited a wider European argument over how courts should treat criticism of religious groups. The ruling came after Jehovah's Witnesses sued the Spanish Association of Victims of Jehovah's Witnesses, which had used the phrase in public criticism of the faith. The court said the language fell within protected speech when used in context and without malice, according to reporting by El País and AFP. Court sides with free expression. The Madrid Provincial Court upheld an earlier decision that had favored the association's right to speak about its experiences. El País reported that the judges accepted that the phrase destructive sect could remain within lawful debate because the association cited testimonies from former members and allegations of abuse. AFP, as carried by Vanguard, reported that the ruling dated April 16, 2026, said the expression sat within the scope of protected free speech under Spanish law, even if the religious group found it offensive. The same report said the judgment remained open to appeal at Spain's Supreme Court. The case places Spain's constitutional protections for expression and information at the center of a sensitive dispute. In practice, the court drew a line between insult for its own sake and criticism tied to what the association presented as public interest allegations. A fight over reputation. Jehovah's Witnesses had asked the court to stop the association from using the term sect and to award damages. El País reported that the organization sought 25,000 euros, plus the removal of the group's online content and accounts. The court did not erase the reputational harm argument. Instead, it weighed that harm against the association's right to tell its story and refer to conduct it said former members endured. El País said the judges relied in part on testimony linked to alleged CSA and other serious complaints. That distinction matters because it shows how Spanish courts may treat harsh religious criticism when speakers anchor their words in lived experience. The ruling does not create a blanket license to insult faith groups, but it does widen the space for public accusations when a court sees a factual or testimonial basis. So what the judgment means. Legal experts often frame these disputes around the balance between honor and expression, two rights that collide in many European legal systems. In this case, the court gave more weight to expression while still acknowledging that the language could intrude on the group's honor. That tension explains why the ruling has drawn attention beyond Spain. Religious organizations often argue that sect or cult labels damage legitimacy and expose members to stigma, while victim-led groups argue that strong language reflects their experiences and warns the public. The Spanish decision also follows earlier related litigation around Jehovah's Witnesses in the country. Human Rights Without Frontiers reported earlier cases in which Spanish courts examined similar claims about criticism of the organization and the limits of permissible speech. And the detail matters here because the court did not say we are officially declaring Jehovah's Witnesses a sect as a legal fact. That is not the same thing. What it did say was that people who believe they were harmed can describe the group in strong terms if those descriptions are grounded in personal experience and part of a public interest debate. That distinction is important because witnesses often try to collapse criticism into lies, persecution, or slander. But the court drew a line between defamation and testimony. And testimony, when backed by lived experience, is not the same as an attack. That is especially true when dozens of people are saying the same kinds of things happen to them. If you were born and raised in this religion, you know how difficult it is to explain the experience to outsiders. You can tell someone they control who I talk to. You can tell someone they weaponize family relationships. You can tell someone they trained me to fear independent thought. You can also tell them leaving meant losing my entire support system. And sometimes people still do not understand the severity of it. That is why a ruling like this feels validating. The court's summary referenced about 70 testimonies describing internal control, family and social pressure, isolation, and in some cases, serious psychological effects like anxiety, depression, and thoughts of unaliving oneself. Those are not small complaints. Those are life-altering harms. And for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, that is exactly what we have been saying for years. Not every former witness has the same story, but a lot of us recognize these patterns instantly. The fear of disagreeing, the fear of being mocked, the fear of losing your family, the pressure to obey men who claim divine authority, the constant message that you are never doing enough. That kind of environment can shape a person's mind and identity in deep ways. And one of the most frustrating things about the Jehovah's Witness organization is how it hides control behind polite language. They don't call it coercion. They call it encouragement. They don't call it social punishment. They call it loving discipline. They don't call it isolation. They call it maintaining spiritual cleanness. They don't call it fear. They call it healthy respect for Jehovah's arrangement. That vocabulary is part of the problem. It makes harmful systems sound holy. That is why court cases like this are so important. They force the conversation out of watchtower language and into plain reality. If people are describing emotional harm, family estrangement, and psychological damage, then those experiences deserve to be heard without the organization immediately hiding behind religious sensitivity. This is not about attacking belief. It is about accountability. Any group that claims moral authority and absolute truth should also be willing to face criticism when former members describe harm. If the organization is confident that it is loving and safe, then why fight so hard to silence former members? The court emphasized that the language used by former members was not just insult for insult's sake. It recognized that these statements had sufficient factual grounding because they were rooted in lived experiences. That is a major point. Former Jehovah's Witnesses are often told their memories are invalid because they are spiritually weak, apostates, or emotionally damaged. But lived experience still counts. A person does not need a corporate stamp of approval to say, "This hurt me." And when many people independently say the same thing, that becomes part of a broader social truth that cannot just be dismissed as bitterness. That's why survivor testimony is so powerful. A lot of people want proof in the form of one neat document, one smoking gun, one sentence that ends the debate forever. But real life is rarely that tidy. Sometimes the proof is in the pattern. Sometimes it is in the repeated stories. Sometimes it is in the way a system produces the same outcomes over and over again. And that is exactly what this points to. A court acknowledging that people's testimonies matter, especially when those testimonies describe recurring experiences of control and harm. And this ruling is not just a Spanish issue. It matters because Jehovah's Witnesses are a global organization, and their legal battles, public relations strategies, and reputation management tactics are global too. When one court recognizes that former members can use harsh but experience-based language in public debate, that creates momentum. It shows other countries and other courts that former members are not automatically defamatory just because they are critical. This is a serious problem for the organization because it depends heavily on controlling the narrative. It wants to define itself as peaceful, clean, and persecuted. It wants critics to look unstable, angry, or dishonest. But every time a former member speaks out and is taken seriously by institutions outside the religion, that wall gets a little weaker. And let's be honest, that wall has already been cracking for years. More ex-members are speaking. More families are discussing the damage openly. More people are questioning, shunning the blood policy, the CSA handling, and the culture of fear. This ruling does not create that conversation, but it adds fuel to it. And let's talk about the phrase destructive cult or destructive sect. Some people will hear that and immediately say, it sounds extreme. And yes, it is strong. It is a strong phrase. But strong language does not automatically mean false language. People use strong language when they are describing strong experiences. If someone says a relationship was abusive, nobody demands they soften it into challenging. If someone says a company was exploitative, nobody insists they call it not ideal. So why should former Jehovah's Witnesses be forced to sanitize their language when describing a system that affected their families, their mental health, identity, and their freedom? The court's logic seems to be that in public debate, especially when people are speaking about lived experience, the right to speak can outweigh the organization's demand to protect its image. And that is a big deal because too often religious institutions expect special treatment when they should be treated like any other powerful group. For people who have left, this ruling is a reminder that you are not crazy for naming what happened to you. You are not crazy for saying the environment was harmful. You are not crazy for saying the shunning was cruel. You are not crazy for saying the pressure was manipulative. You are not crazy for saying the organization caused damage that still affects you today. The organization wants former members to stay quiet because silence protects them. But every time a former witness tells the truth publicly, it chips away at that silence. And when courts, journalists, and human rights discussions start taking those voices seriously, it becomes harder for a watchtower to pretend the problem is just apostates spreading lies. So yes, this Madrid ruling is about free speech, but for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, it is also about something deeper: dignity. It is about the right to describe abuse without being erased. It is about the right to tell the truth without being branded rebellious. It is about the right to say, this organization harmed me, and have that statement treated as legitimate public testimony. And that is why this story matters, because every time the truth gets a bigger platform, the old control tactics get weaker. Please like and subscribe and share if you like this video. Until next time.